Well, that went splendidly, I announced to my command staff, leaning back in my hover chair and propping my clawed feet on the glossy black conference table. 3 human colonies reduced to smoking craters in less than a solar cycle. I'd call that efficient, wouldn't you? The assembled officers of the glorious Vorexian Empire nodded in appropriate acknowledgement of my brilliant leadership, as they should. I, Admiral Q.R. Talk, First Fang of the Imperial Fleet, had just orchestrated what would surely be recorded as the most decisive first strike in galactic conquest history. Admiral, my second-in-command Bravlak ventured, preliminary reports indicate casualty numbers exceeding 8 million humans. Only 8 million. Disappointing. I was hoping for at least 10, I replied, examining my talons with practiced nonchalance. But I suppose it's enough to make our point. Humans needed to learn their place in the cosmic hierarchy. I gestured toward the holographic display dominating the center of our war room. 3 planets New Terra, Arcturus Prime, and Harmony rotated slowly, their once blue atmospheres now clouded with debris and firestorms. Beautiful work, if I do say so myself. The Emperor will be pleased, purred Strategic Director Zelmora, her scaled skin shimmering under the harsh lights. The humans have resources we need, territory we want, and a spirit that needs breaking. This was the perfect first move. Was there any significant resistance? Asked General Pax Lore, our ground forces commander who had been disappointed at not being needed for this particular operation. Poor fellow always eager for some good old-fashioned bloodshed. I snorted. Resistance? From humans? Please. Their orbital defenses were pathetic. A handful of outdated shield generators and weapon systems that wouldn't frighten a Jovian space slug. Their much-vaunted United Earth Defense Force didn't even show up until we were already leaving. Too busy debating. Protocol or filing paperwork, no doubt. The room filled with chittering laughter. Humans and their obsession with rules, procedures, and endless diplomatic channels. What fools. While they talked, we acted. While they debated the ethics of preemptive strikes, we struck. It was almost too easy. If I may, Admiral, our xenobiologist Dr. Mavic interrupted, her voice unusually hesitant. There's something peculiar in the human response channels. I waved a dismissive claw. Let me guess. Outrage? Threats? Calls for emergency councils? No, sir. That's just it. There's been no official response from Earth Central. No emergency broadcast. No call for galactic intervention. Nothing. Malmo. That was unexpected. I straightened slightly in my chair. Nothing at all. Well, not exactly nothing, Mavic continued, consulting her data pad. Just a single, brief transmission sent system-wide, apparently originating from their military headquarters on Luna. And what did this transmission say? I prompted, suddenly curious despite myself. Just 3 words, sir. Dragon protocol activated. An uncomfortable silence fell across the war room. Dragons? I finally asked. What in the 7 hells are dragons? Lieutenant Fentak, our intelligence officer, cleared his throat nervously. Ancient Earth mythological creatures, sir. Fire-breathing reptiles of immense power and ferocity, often depicted guarding treasure or sleeping for centuries before awakening to wreak havoc. Sleeping before awakening? How quaint, I sneered, though something about the phrasing made the scales on the back of my neck rise. So they're activating some dramatic-sounding military protocol. Big deal. Probably just a pompous name for their emergency response system. But even as I spoke, the main communications array chimed with an incoming priority alert. Command Officer Trinval swiveled toward her station, her eyes widening as she scanned the incoming data. Sir, she said, her voice uncharacteristically strained. We've just lost contact with our entire forward fleet in the Proxima system. All 37 warships. Simultaneously. I stared at her, my smug satisfaction beginning to curdle into something far less comfortable. "And sir?" Trinval added, her voice barely above a whisper now. Just before communications cut out, several captains reported the same thing. Massive energy signatures appearing out of nowhere. Thousands of them. Coming from Earth. Perhaps, I thought as my stomach dropped uncomfortably, this conquest might not be as straightforward as I had anticipated. 37 warships don't just vanish. Emperor Drakmar slammed his fist onto the table, causing several of my fellow admirals to flinch. Not me, of course. I'm made of sterner stuff. I want answers, not excuses. The high command chamber of the Vorexian Empire, all gleaming obsidian and pulsing red lighting designed to remind us of our glorious evolution from carnivorous predators, had never felt so tense. 12 hours had passed since we lost contact with our forward fleet, and the Emperor had called an emergency session that pulled military leaders from across 3 sectors. "Your Magnificence," I began, keeping my voice steady, "we are investigating several possibilities. Perhaps a weapons malfunction or a spatial anomaly. Or perhaps the humans actually have teeth," interrupted Grand Admiral Vexlar, my longtime rival. His scarred face twisted into what passed for a smile among our kind. "Teeth you provoked by bombing their colonies without proper authorization from this council." I bristled. The strike was perfectly legal under Conquest Directive 37B, which authorizes preemptive action against potential threats. Besides, they're humans. Soft, squabbling primates who spend more time arguing about resource allocation than building proper defenses. "Then explain this," demanded Minister of Intelligence Jax Yuri, activating the central hologram. It displayed a star chart with the Proxima system highlighted in angry red. Our long-range scanners detected massive energy discharges in this region, consistent with advanced weapons technology. Technology the humans supposedly don't possess. She continued, tapping her sharp claws against her datapad. Following this, we intercepted numerous transmissions between human military outposts. Most were heavily encrypted, but our analysts caught repeated references to something called Operation Sleeping Dragon, Dragon Awakening Protocols, and most concerning, releasing the restraints. Restraints? Emperor Drakmar leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across half the table. What restraints? Jax Uri looked uncomfortable. Unknown, Your Magnificence. But there's more. Since the attack on the colonies and this response, 6 of our allied species have formally requested withdrawal from the Vorexian Dominion Pact. A shocked murmur rippled through the chamber. 6 allies? The Emperor's voice was dangerously quiet. Which ones? The Trilari Collective, the Quantum Minds of Deneb, the Pax Federation, the Hydraxian Empire, the Omega Concord, and she hesitated, the Zinthari Republic. That got my attention. The Zinthari were our oldest allies, having fought alongside the Vorexian Empire for 3 centuries. What reason did they give? I demanded. Jax Uri's multifaceted eyes flickered nervously. The Zinthari ambassador's exact words were, "We cannot remain allied with those foolish enough to wake the sleeping dragons of Earth. We have seen this before. We will not see it again." Emperor Drakmar turned his penetrating gaze to me. "It seems, Admiral Kor talk, that everyone in the galaxy knows something about these humans that you do not." Superstitious nonsense, I scoffed, though a cold feeling was spreading through my gut. The Zinthari have always been jumpy, and the others are simply opportunistic cowards looking for an excuse to break their commitments. As for these dragons, it's obviously just pompous human terminology for some outdated defense protocol. Fleet Commander Haz Tura cleared her throat delicately. "Admiral, I've just received word that the humans have mobilized something they call the 7th Void Fleet. According to our operatives, this fleet didn't exist in any of our intelligence reports." Didn't exist? Grand Admiral Vexlar's crest flared in alarm. "How is that possible? We've had spies in their military administration for decades. I waved a dismissive hand, though my confidence was starting to feel rather forced. Obviously disinformation. A desperate attempt to frighten us with phantom ships and imaginary weapons. "Then perhaps you can explain this," said Jax Yuri, changing the hologram to show a live feed from our border outpost near the Arcturus jump point. The image showed a vast formation of ships emerging from what appeared to be nowhere. Not from jump points. Not from planetary cover. Just appearing, as if they'd been there all along, but somehow invisible. The chamber fell silent. "Well," I finally said, my throat suddenly dry. "That's unexpected." Emperor Drakmar's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. "Admiral Qor talk. I'm starting to think your expertise on human capabilities might be somewhat lacking." I swallowed hard. "Your Magnificence, I assure you, whatever these ships are, the mighty Vorexian Empire can." The hologram flickered and died, along with every light in the high command chamber. When emergency power activated 30 seconds later, Jax Yuri's face was ashen. Border outpost Arcturus has gone dark. All 30,000 personnel. Gone. And just like that, my comfortable certainty began to crumble. Would someone mind explaining how an entire species managed to hide a fleet large enough to obliterate our border outpost? Emperor Drakmar growled, pacing the war room like a caged predator. 6 hours had passed since we lost contact with Outpost Arcturus, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. This was problematic for my career trajectory, to say the least. "Your Magnificence," Intelligence Officer Nyx Ara stepped forward, a slender Vorexian female with unusually dark scales and calculating eyes. "I believe I may have found some answers." All eyes turned to her. Nyx Ara was notorious for her thoroughness and her disturbingly accurate threat assessments. If anyone could make sense of this mess, it would be her. "Speak," the Emperor commanded. Nyx Ara activated her data pad, projecting a timeline of human history onto the central display. "My team has been conducting deep archival research into human military history. What we've found suggests a disturbing pattern." The timeline stretched back thousands of years, highlighted with countless conflicts. Humans. Nyx Ara began, her voice clinical, are perhaps the only known species that has spent most of their evolutionary history fighting themselves. Their planet contains over 10,000 distinct recorded wars. For perspective, the average for sentient species is 300 to 400 before achieving unified planetary government. Yes, we know they're barbarians," I interjected. "That's hardly." "With respect, Admiral." Nyx Ara cut me off with a coldness that made me blink. "You don't know." None of us did. Consider this. Most species unify after developing nuclear weapons due to the obvious extinction risk. Humans? They built 70,000 nuclear weapons during something they called a Cold War. Aimed to the brink of extinction multiple times and somehow didn't pull the trigger. She tapped her pad, bringing up images that made several commanders flinch devastation on a scale that seemed almost mythological. This is Hiroshima, after just one primitive atomic weapon. The humans did this to themselves as an experiment, as a warning. To themselves. The Emperor leaned forward. "Your point, Officer Nyx Ara?" "My point, Your Magnificence, is that we have fundamentally misunderstood human psychology. Their apparent weakness, their tedious diplomacy, their obsession with rules of engagement, their insistence on coalition building, these aren't signs of softness. They're restraints, self-imposed restraints." Nyx Ara's eyes swept across the room. "We've all read the standard galactic intelligence reports on Earth. Technologically capable, but militarily limited. What we've discovered is that these reports were deliberately cultivated by humans themselves." "Impossible," I scoffed. "Our intelligence network was compromised," she said flatly, "for centuries. The humans have been systematically downplaying their military capacity, technological achievements, and territorial reach. I believe they've been doing this since they first encountered alien life. But why? Asked Jack's Uri. What possible advantage? Because they know what they are, Nyxara said simply. And they were afraid of how we might react if we knew too. She brought up a new document, ancient by the look of it, written in primitive human script. This is from a human military theorist named Sun Tzu, from thousands of years ago. Appear weak when you are strong. Another from a leader called Winston Churchill. In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. Nyxara paused to let that sink in. And now, she continued, we come to the Dragon protocols. My team has managed to decode portions of their emergency transmissions. As best we can determine, these protocols were established nearly a century ago, when humans first ventured beyond their solar system and encountered other intelligent life. She displayed a complex organizational chart. The protocols appeared to be a series of contingency plans for existential threats to humanity. The metaphor is drawn from ancient Earth mythology. Dragons were typically depicted as sleeping beasts of immense power. When awakened by a threat, the results were catastrophic for whoever disturbed them. So what exactly are these dragons? The Emperor demanded. Not what, Your Magnificence. Who? Nyxara's expression was grim. The dragons are humanity itself, or more specifically, humanity unleashed from its self-imposed constraints. The protocols dictate that in the event of an unprovoked attack resulting in mass civilian casualties, all restrictions on military technology, weapons development, and rules of engagement are immediately lifted. A heavy silence fell over the room. You're saying I began, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. I'm saying, Admiral, that we didn't attack a weak species. We attacked a predator species that has spent centuries deliberately appearing harmless. Nyxara's eyes met mine without flinching. The humans weren't cowering behind diplomacy. They were protecting us from themselves. Grand Admiral Vexlar's voice was barely above a whisper. And now, Nyxara said, we've done the one thing their history warned against. We've backed them into a corner and threatened their survival. The dragons are awake. For the first time in my military career, I felt something I had never experienced before, a cold, slithering sensation in my gut that I belatedly recognized as genuine fear. Alarms blared throughout the Imperial command ship Eternal Dominion as I rushed to the bridge. 2 days had passed since our enlightening and thoroughly disturbing intelligence briefing, and I had spent every waking moment reinforcing our homeworld's defenses. Clearly, it hadn't been enough. Status report. I barked, taking my position at the command center. The massive view screen showed chaos, dozens of Vorexian battlecruisers moving into defensive formations around our homeworld, Vorex Prime. Admiral, my tactical officer Krelvan looked up from his station, his scales pale with stress. Sensors have detected multiple spatial distortions forming at the edge of our system. They're not using the jump gate, sir. That was impossible. Everyone used the jump gate network for interstellar travel. It was the only way to traverse the vast distances between stars without spending decades in transit. What? Show me, I ordered. The view screen shifted to show the outer system. What I saw made my blood run cold. Space itself seemed to be folding, creating swirling vortices of light and energy. And from these impossible tiers in reality, they emerged. Human ships. But not like any I had ever seen in intelligence reports or tactical briefings. These vessels defied conventional design logic. Some were sleek and predatory, cutting through space like living shadows. Others were massive and irregular, resembling floating cities more than warships. But all of them shared one characteristic. They radiated power on a scale our sensors could barely quantify. By the Emperor's teeth, whispered Commander Drez Kor beside me. What are those things? Those, I said, my throat dry, are the dragons. Sir, called out my communications officer, we're receiving transmissions from our advance pickets. The human vessels they're not using conventional propulsion. They're somehow manipulating space-time itself to move. As we watched, a Vorexian battle group moved to intercept the first wave of human ships. Our cruisers opened fire with plasma torpedoes and graviton beams, weapons that could shatter moons. The human vessels didn't even bother to evade. The weapons simply disappeared, as if swallowed by invisible shields. What in the seven hells, I muttered. Then the humans returned fire. It wasn't a barrage. It wasn't a volley. It was just erasure. Beams of energy so intensely focused they appeared as thin lines of blinding white light lanced out from the human ships. Wherever they touched a Vorexian vessel, the ship simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris, just gone. What weapon is that? I demanded, unable to keep the tremor from my voice. Science Officer Maldira's voice was faint. Unknown, Admiral. Our sensors indicate it might be controlled singularity projection. But that's theoretical technology. No species has ever. 6 more spatial rifts opening. Interrupted Krell Van. Bigger than the first wave. From these new rifts emerged even larger vessels, colossal ships that dwarfed our biggest dreadnoughts. One in particular caught my eye, a massive, angular construct that seemed to bend light around it in unsettling ways. Admiral, my communications officer's voice had risen an octave. We're receiving a directed transmission from the human fleet. They're requesting to speak with you personally. I swallowed hard. Put it through. The view screen shifted, and for the first time I looked upon the face of our enemy. The human was female, with dark skin and close-cropped silver hair. She wore a simple black uniform adorned with minimal insignia, no ostentatious displays of rank or achievement like our military favored. Just quiet, confident authority. Her eyes, though her eyes were ancient, holding the cold calculation of a predator who had evolved at the top of her food chain. Admiral Core talk, she said, her voice surprisingly melodious for a species about to commit genocide. I am Admiral Eliza Blackwood of the United Earth Fleet. I believe you've been expecting us. The casual confidence in her tone sent shivers down my spine. Admiral Blackwood, I replied, struggling to maintain my composure. Your response seems disproportionate to the unfortunate incident at your colonies. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in those predator eyes. Unfortunate incident? Is that what you call the deliberate bombing of 3 civilian worlds? 8 million lives extinguished because you thought us weak? We were within our rights under the Galactic. We're not interested in your justifications, Admiral, she cut me off. You should know that prior to your attack, there was significant debate among our leadership about our place in the galactic community. Many argued that our self-imposed restrictions were outdated, that we should reveal our true capabilities, share our technology. Others maintained that the galaxy wasn't ready, that our advancements would destabilize existing power structures and potentially lead to devastating wars. She leaned forward slightly. You just settled that debate. Conclusively. A new alarm sounded, proximity warning. I glanced at the tactical display and felt my heart stutter. Somehow, without any of our sensors detecting their approach, 3 human vessels had bypassed our entire defense fleet. They now hovered less than 1,000 kilometers from the Eternal Dominion. How did they? I began, but stopped as I noticed something else. Tactical readouts showed human ships appearing throughout our system near our moon bases, our orbital shipyards, our defense platforms. They had surrounded us completely in under 5 minutes. You're probably wondering about our faster-than-light capabilities, Admiral Blackwood continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather. We cracked that particular puzzle about 70 years ago. Folding space is so much more efficient than those cumbersome jump gates everyone else uses. But we kept using them anyway, Appearances, you understand." I did understand. All too clearly now. "What do you want?" I asked, hating how weak my voice sounded. "For starters, unconditional surrender of all Vorexian military forces. Immediately. After that, we'll discuss reparations for the colonies you destroyed." Her smile was terrifying in its calm certainty. "I'd recommend compliance, Admiral. What you've seen so far is our diplomatic approach. You really don't want to see what happens when we get serious." As if to punctuate her statement, one of our largest dreadnoughts, the Pride of Vorex, attempted to launch a surprise attack on the nearest human vessel. The response was immediate and horrifying. The human ship emitted a pulse of energy that seemed to ripple through reality itself. When it touched the Pride of Vorex, the massive warship simply inverted, collapsing in on itself with geometric precision, until nothing remained but a small, dense point of light that quickly winked out of existence. Looking at Admiral Blackwood's calm face as she watched 3,000 Vorexian warriors die in an instant, I finally understood the true meaning of the dragon metaphor. We hadn't just awakened a sleeping giant. We had awakened something far worse, a species that had mastered the art of appearing harmless while secretly becoming gods. "I believe," Admiral Blackwood said through the view screen, her voice unnervingly calm, "that we should continue this conversation in person. It seems there are some historical contexts you're missing." My first instinct was to refuse. Getting onto a human vessel seemed like a spectacularly bad idea given recent developments. But a glance at the tactical display showing our once mighty defense fleet reduced to scattered, disorganized remnants made it clear that refusal wasn't actually an option. "Very well," I conceded, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. "I will meet with you to discuss terms." 12 minutes later, I found myself stepping off a Vorexian shuttle into the cavernous hangar bay of Admiral Blackwood's flagship, the Leviathan. I had expected guards, restraints, perhaps even some show of force to emphasize my new status as a defeated enemy. Instead, I was greeted by the Admiral herself, accompanied only by a single aide. "Thank you for coming, Admiral Kortok," she said, extending her hand in what I recognized as a human greeting gesture. Reluctantly, I took it, finding her grip firm but not aggressive. "This way, please. I believe the observation deck will be most suitable for our discussion." As we walked through the ship, I couldn't help but notice the conspicuous absence of weapons or defensive systems. The corridors were spacious, well-lit, and more reminiscent of a luxury vessel than a warship. Yet I had just witnessed this same vessel erase a dreadnought from existence. "You seem confused," Blackwood noted as we entered a lift. "Your ship," I said. "Where are the weapon systems? The defensive emplacements?" "Ah." She smiled slightly. "You're looking for external hardware. We moved beyond that approach quite some time ago." The lift doors opened to reveal the observation deck, a vast, semicircular room with a transparent ceiling and walls that offered an unobstructed view of space. Vorex Prime hung in the distance, my homeworld now surrounded by the human fleet. "Please sit," Blackwood gestured to a conference table. As I took my seat, she pressed a small device on her wrist. A holographic display sprang to life above the table, showing a timeline that stretched back thousands of years. "Human history," she explained, "or more specifically, the classified version." She touched a point on the timeline, roughly 3 centuries in the past. "This is when we achieved our first major breakthrough in quantum manipulation technology. The ability to directly influence matter at the subatomic level. Within decades, we had solved our energy crisis, eliminated most diseases, and begun the process of re-engineering our own solar system." Another point, perhaps 50 years later. "This is when we developed what we call pocket dimension technology. The ability to create and access small regions of space that exist slightly out of phase with normal reality, perfect for storage, research facilities, or..." Her eyes met mine, hiding military assets from prying eyes. My mind raced, trying to process the implications. You're saying that for centuries, human technological development has been what? A charade? Not entirely. We've shared many genuine advancements. Medical technology, environmental remediation techniques, limited AI systems, she shrugged. But the truly revolutionary discoveries, those we kept to ourselves. Why? I demanded. If you possess such power, why not use it? You could have dominated the galaxy centuries ago. Because we remember our own history all too well, Blackwood replied, her expression somber. Humans nearly destroyed themselves multiple times. We've had thousands of wars, genocides, atrocities. We know exactly what we're capable of when fear and power intersect. She touched another point on the timeline. This is when we made first contact with the Xanthari, approximately 247 years ago. They recognized what we were immediately a young species with terrifying potential. They had encountered others like us before. Others? I echoed. Species that advance too quickly, develop technologies they aren't culturally prepared to handle. The Xanthari have a term for it, ascension syndrome. The most species that develop as rapidly as humans did either destroy themselves or become galactic predators. Her gaze was steady. The Galactic Council determined that humanity represented an existential threat to stable interspecies relations. I felt my scales tighten. They were going to eliminate you. They considered it, Blackwood nodded. But the Xanthari proposed an alternative. The Dragon Protocol. A binding agreement, humans would voluntarily restrict our technological development, maintain only a modest defensive fleet, using conventional technologies, and integrate peacefully into the galactic community. In exchange, we would be left alone to develop at our own pace within our territory. And the Council agreed to this? Not all of them. But enough. The protocol had one critical condition, however. If humanity was ever faced with an existential threat, if our colonies were attacked without provocation or our sovereignty directly challenged, all restrictions would be immediately lifted. She leaned forward. We've honored that agreement for over 2 centuries. Admiral QR Tuck. We've played by the rules, used the jump gates when we didn't need to, built conventional warships when we could have deployed vessels that exist partially outside normal spacetime, fought with plasma weapons when we had mastered quantum manipulation. I felt sick as the full implications washed over me. And we provided the justification for you to stop pretending. Precisely, she said quietly. When you bombed our colonies, you didn't just kill 8 million humans. You released us from the constraints that have been protecting the galaxy from us for centuries. I stared out at the stars, at my homeworld now at the mercy of a species that had been carefully hiding its true nature since before my great-grandparents were born. Oh gods, I whispered. What have we done? I slouched in my command chair, watching the tactical display with growing despair. 3 days had passed since my meeting with Admiral Blackwood. 3 days of watching everything the Virexian Empire had built over centuries of conquest methodically dismantled by the humans. Sir, reported Tactical Officer Krelvan, his voice hollow with exhaustion. We've lost contact with the Helios defense grid. I didn't bother responding. The Helios grid had been our most fortified military installation outside the home system, a massive complex of interconnected battle stations, automated defense platforms, and antimatter minefields. It had repelled 17 major assaults from various rival powers over the last century. The humans took it in under 6 hours. How? I finally asked, more to myself than to my bridge crew. How are they coordinating on this scale? The human counterattack wasn't merely overwhelming, it was elegant, precise. They weren't just throwing superior firepower at us. They were systematically identifying and neutralizing every aspect of our military infrastructure in perfect sequence, like a surgeon removing a cancer cell by cell. Admiral. Science Officer Maldira approached cautiously. I've been analyzing their attack patterns. They appear to be utilizing some form of distributed intelligence network. Each of their ships operates with perfect awareness of all others, sharing targeting data and tactical information in real time. Some kind of hive mind? I suggested. She shook her head. No, something more sophisticated. Each vessel retains independent decision-making capabilities, but benefits from collective intelligence. It's beyond anything in our theoretical models. The main view screen switched to an incoming transmission. It was Admiral Blackwood again, looking as composed as ever. Admiral Core Talk, she greeted me. I thought you might appreciate an update on our progress. Come to gloat? I snarled, my former diplomatic restraint long abandoned. Not at all. I thought you might want to understand what's happening. It might make things easier for your people in the long run. Her tone was almost sympathetic, which somehow made it worse. We've now neutralized approximately 67% of your offensive military capabilities across all Vorexian-controlled space. 67%. In 3 days. It had taken the Vorexian Empire nearly a century to build those forces. You're not just defeating us, I said. The realization dawning. You're eradicating us. Not your people, Blackwood corrected. Just your capacity to wage war. There's an important distinction. The display beside her changed to show a real-time map of Vorexian territory. Hundreds of red dots, our military installations, winked out one by one as I watched. Right now, she continued, specialized human task forces are dismantling every shipyard, weapons factory, and military research facility in your territory. Other teams are neutralizing your antimatter production facilities, quantum torpedo stockpiles, and graviton beam emplacements. I stared in horror as centuries of military development vanished before my eyes. But how are you finding them all? We have secret bases that aren't in any official record. Blackwood's expression remained neutral. We mapped your entire empire years ago, Admiral, including the facilities you thought were hidden. Remember those defective navigation satellites you purchased from the Trilari Collective? The ones manufactured on Earth? My blood ran cold. Those satellites had been deployed throughout our territory over a decade ago. You've been planning this for years, I whispered. Not planning, preparing. There's a difference. We hoped never to implement these measures, but we didn't leave anything to chance. She paused. You should know that we've also located and contained all 17 of your superweapon development sites. My heart's nearly stopped. Those sites were our most closely guarded secret black projects, so classified that even I only knew of their existence, not their locations. That's impossible, I stammered. No, Admiral, just thorough. For the first time, I saw something like pity in her eyes. You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? For over 2 centuries, we've been the silent observers of the galaxy. While appearing to focus on diplomacy and trade, we've been mapping every star system, tracking every fleet movement, infiltrating every major power. Not for conquest, but for contingency. On the tactical display, I watched as a human strike team disabled our last remaining fleet anchorage in the Deneb sector. The precision was breathtaking. They didn't destroy the facility, just surgically removed its offensive capabilities while leaving life support and civilian systems untouched. You fight like no species I've ever encountered, I admitted, a strange mix of fear and reluctant admiration washing over me. There's no wasted effort, no collateral damage. You're not trying to conquer us, you're neutering us. An apt observation, Blackwood nodded. Most species fight to defeat their enemies. Some fight to destroy them. Humans fight to ensure the threat can never rise again. It's a lesson from our own bloody history. If you leave an enemy with the means and motive to retaliate, they inevitably will. A new alert sounded. Our quantum communication network had just gone offline. Our empire-wide command and control structure gone in an instant. How many ships do you have? I asked, suddenly realizing I had no idea of the true extent of human military power. How are you coordinating attacks across 20 sectors simultaneously? For the first time, Blackwood smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Admiral Core talk. The vessels you've encountered represent less than 8% of our actual fleet. Most of our ships remain in what we call pocket space, deployed throughout the galaxy, but invisible to conventional sensors. As for coordination, she shrugged. Let's just say quantum entanglement enables certain communication advantages. I slumped back in my chair, the last vestiges of my formerly smug confidence evaporating like morning dew. We weren't just outmatched. We were playing an entirely different game, with rules we didn't even understand. What happens when you're done? I asked quietly. When we've confirmed that your empire no longer possesses offensive military capabilities? We leave you with enough defensive technology to protect yourselves, but nothing that could threaten another species. Then we withdraw. And if we try to rebuild? Her expression hardened slightly. Don't. Attention all Vorexian military forces. This is Admiral Core talk, first Fang of the Imperial Fleet. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, hollow, defeated. By order of Emperor Drakmar and the High Command, all combat operations are to cease immediately. All vessels are to power down weapons systems and await further instructions. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. I disconnected from the empire-wide broadcast and turned to face the somber gathering of military leaders in the Imperial Palace's Grand Hall. For the first time in the 1,000-year history of the Vorexian Empire, we were surrendering. And it was my fault. The transmission has been acknowledged by all remaining command centers. Your Magnificence, I reported to Emperor Drakmar, who sat motionless on his obsidian throne. Then it is done, he said simply. Convey to the humans that I will receive their delegation to discuss terms. 2 hours later, I stood at the Emperor's right hand as the massive doors to the Grand Hall swung open. Admiral Blackwood entered, flanked by only 2 officers. No armed guards. No show of force. They didn't need it. Emperor Drakmar, Blackwood bowed slightly, a courtesy, not a submission. Thank you for receiving us. The Emperor inclined his head. You have defeated us utterly, Admiral. We acknowledge this fact and seek terms for our surrender. Blackwood approached, producing a small device that projected a holographic document between them. Our terms are straightforward, Your Magnificence. The Vorexian Empire will immediately dismantle all remaining offensive military capabilities. You will withdraw from all territories acquired by conquest within the last century and pay reparations to affected species. The Emperor studied the document. And in return? In return, you get to keep your empire, your culture, and your future. Blackwood's voice was firm but not unkind. We have no interest in occupation or subjugation. We want only to ensure that you never again pose a threat to peaceful species. As the Emperor reviewed the details with his advisors, I found myself moving closer to Blackwood. You could have destroyed us completely, I said quietly. Why didn't you? She studied me for a moment. Because that's not who we choose to be, Admiral Core talk. Despite what you may think, humans don't desire genocide. We don't glory in destruction. We simply refuse to tolerate threats to our existence. Even after what we did to your colonies. Even then, her eyes held mine. Though you should know that what you've witnessed of our capabilities represents only a fraction of what we could bring to bear if truly provoked. I felt a chill run through me. You're still holding back? For answer, she gestured to one of her officers, who stepped forward and activated a small device. A three-dimensional image appeared between us, showing what appeared to be a massive construction in orbit around a distant star. This is the Dyson sphere we completed around Proxima Centauri 30 years ago, she said matter-of-factly. One of 17 similar structures we've built throughout our territory. Each harnesses the entire energy output of a star. We've been using them primarily for scientific research and to power our dimensional engineering projects. I stared at the image, my mind struggling to comprehend the scale of what I was seeing. Why show me this now? Because I want you to understand something fundamental about humans, Admiral. We're not inherently warlike. We don't seek dominance. But we plan for every contingency, and we have very long memories. Her expression hardened slightly. The Dragon protocols weren't just about freeing us from restrictions. They were about sending a message. The Emperor's voice interrupted our conversation, announcing his acceptance of the terms. As the formalities were completed and the surrender document was officially transmitted throughout the Empire, Blackwood prepared to depart. At the door, she turned back to me. Remember this, Admiral QR talk. The Dragons are awake now, and we're watching. Always watching. As she left, I realized that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The humans had revealed themselves as the power they truly were, not through conquest or oppression, but through a controlled demonstration of overwhelming force that left no room for doubt. And it had all begun with my smug certainty that they were weak. And that, esteemed delegates, is why any military action against human territories would be, to put it in the simplest possible terms, suicidal. I paused to look around the conference chamber at the assembled representatives of the Unified Systems Coalition. Are there any questions? A young Xalarian diplomat raised a tentacle. Ambassador Kor talk. Surely after 15 years, the humans must have relaxed their vigilance somewhat. Perhaps returned to their former policy of restraint? I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. 5 years as the Vorexian ambassador for interspecies relations had taught me patience, but some questions still tested my limits. Let me be perfectly clear, I said, leaning forward on my podium. The Dragons are not going back to sleep. Once awakened, they remain alert. Always. The chamber fell silent. Even now, a decade and a half after what historians called the Vorexian humbling, the mere mention of human military capabilities was enough to silence a room. But they've been so helpful, ventured a Palaxian representative. Their medical technology alone has saved billions of lives across coalition space. Yes, I agreed. The humans are extraordinarily generous with their non-military technologies. They've helped cure diseases, solve energy crises, and develop more efficient FTL communication systems for general use. That's their preferred approach: peaceful cooperation, scientific advancement, cultural exchange. I gestured toward the large viewing window where Earth's massive embassy station hung in orbit above the Coalition's headquarters world. Its elegant design belied the fact that it could, if necessary, destroy everything within a light year. But make no mistake, I continued. Since the Dragon protocols were activated, humanity has maintained what they call transparent readiness. They don't hide their military capabilities anymore. They don't pretend to be less advanced than they are. They simply go about their business while making it abundantly clear that they are prepared for any threat. I clicked a control, displaying a holographic map of known space. Human territory glowed blue, a relatively small region compared to some of the older empires, but now universally understood to be inviolable. The galaxy has changed, my friends. Species that once viewed humans as upstarts now seek their alliance. Territories that border human space advertise this fact to attract colonists. There's no safer place to be than next door to the most formidable military power in known space. I switched off the display and fixed the assembled delegates with my most serious expression, the one I had practiced for years, to convey the gravity of this particular warning. So if you're thinking of bombing human colonies, don't. Unless your civilization has a death wish. In which case, by all means, go ahead. They love the exercise. My sarcastic tone drew nervous laughter from the chamber. Speaking from personal experience, I cannot recommend it. The Dragons are magnificent in flight, but you really don't want to see them breathe fire. As the session concluded, and the delegates filed out. I found myself once again contemplating the strange twist of fate that had transformed me from would-be conqueror to cautionary tale. In my darkest moments, I still saw the cold certainty in Admiral Blackwood's eyes as she explained exactly how thoroughly we had miscalculated. But I had learned my lesson, and if my life's work now was ensuring that no one else made our mistake, well, there were worse ways to serve the galaxy. The humans had a saying, "Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it." I was determined that no one would repeat our history. Not while the dragons were watching.